The first thing that we want to look at in section 11.1 is testing a hypothesis regarding two population proportions. So in this demonstration, I'm going to be looking at example 2 in our textbook, and that example has to do with clinical trials of Nasonex. And so the patients were divided into two groups, and we have group 1, which is the experimental group, and we have group 2, which is the control group. So I put everything over here on the left in a Word document. So the number of successes is 547 out of the observations of 2,103 for the experimental group. For the control group, the p-hat, the number of successes is 368 out of 1,671. And so the question says, is there significant evidence to conclude that the proportion of Nasonex users who experienced headaches as a side effect is greater than the proportion of the control group, using alpha equals 0.05 level of significance? So my null hypothesis all the time is that proportion 1 equals proportion 2. My alternate hypothesis is that proportion 1, the experimental group, is greater than the control group, and our level of significance is 0.05. So on the right, we have StatCrunch open, and we're going to go to Stat, down to Proportion Stats, to Sample, with Summary. In my first sample, the successes, 547 out of the observations, 2,103. In sample 2, the number of successes, 368 out of the number of observations, 1,671. We're doing the hypothesis test. Notice how it always defaults to 0 because we're going to say there's no difference as the null hypothesis. And then the alternate hypothesis is we're going to change it to greater than, so that the difference between P1 and P2 is greater than 0. And then we're going to click on Compute. So when we click on Compute, we're coming over here and we're going to look at the z-stat, and the test statistic is 2.839. So if we're doing the classical approach and comparing it to a critical value, we're going to use the z-stat of 2.839. P-value approach, which is what we've been doing in our class, gives us a p-value of 0.0025. Now remember, we compare the p-value to alpha. P-value is less than alpha, we reject the null hypothesis. P-value less than alpha, reject the null hypothesis. There is sufficient evidence at the alpha equals 0.05 level of significance to conclude that the proportion of individuals taking Nasonex who experience headaches is greater than the proportion of individuals taking a placebo who experience headaches.